So we're really excited to hear from our incredible panelists and moderator today, who are going to explore this theme of trust in general, but specifically for civil society actors, where it's gone, what we can do to strengthen it in order to preserve and protect our important work ahead. We'll be continuing this conversation throughout the year where we focus on trust and the role of civil society in times like these. So please stay tuned. We'll next pick up this conversation at the OECD Civil Society Days. There'll be, even if you're not able to attend in person, there'll be a virtual link for an important conversation we'll have there on CSO accountability. And stay tuned in a couple months for another discussion on navigating change inside institutions, also reflecting back on this theme of trust. So that's probably a lot for me. Those are some big hopes, but I'm sure our panelists and moderator have even bigger ones. So it's a true honor to welcome our moderator, the all-star expert extravaganza herself. Chalande Waria, can I pass over to you to carry us forward here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. And welcome to everybody. And I don't want to waste your time, but because I come from a community that likes to tell stories, I'm going to start with that. Very short story. Just to share, actually, it's not more telling you, sharing an interesting experience and telling you a story. Where a few weeks ago, I came across, a collective of civil society organizations that had just written their own compliance principles. I know many people at this point in time are trying to, come up with their own standards of this, that, and the other. But they said, people are always telling us how we need to look and feel. And what about if we developed one of ourselves, one that is not donor mandated? Nobody came to them and told them, develop something, not pages of procurement jargon, but something really that is centered and grounded in community rooted values for what they believe being accountable should look like. And this is what they were now using to negotiate with a particular funder. So they were sharing it with me and saying, what do you think? What do you think? Is this going to pass or not? And one of them just simply said, friends supporting our work, credibility. The credibility gap is becoming wider and wider. And we're meant to be accountability's last line of defense. So what happens when we ourselves are not seen as trustworthy? And that's what today is about. How do we reimagine accountability, not as being compliant to donors, but really as a commitment to our communities? How do we ensure that in a world increasingly shaped by, all this impunity from those that have more than others, and governments being more and more opaque, how does civil society not quietly surrender its own integrity? Because, honestly, once trust is eroded everywhere, then we must earn it back by small actions, by each and every small community that we touch. And so we need to really start thinking about radical acts of being transparent, of listening, and of care. So today's discussion really is not looking to diagnose this problem, because I think we know it, we've said it, we've read documents, but really about naming our individual roles as key players in civil society. How do we explore what it will take to build something more accountable, more responsive, more trustworthy, and even, when resources are scarce and the risks are high, how do we continue this in a way that is honest, courageous, and also shows care for those that we are out to serve? So having said that, today is not about me. I have a fantastic panel. I would love to introduce them because they're also dear people that I admire very, very deeply. But I'm going to delve into this discussion by asking them one by one to introduce themselves in ways that, in the site, we have many hats. So you tell us what hat you're bringing here, but more importantly, share with us what draws you personally to this conversation, whether it's a frustration, it's your vision, it's your lived experience. What do you think, what draws you to this conversation that makes this topic very real for you? And it's a big question. I know we are all passionate, but I'm going to give you just about 1 to 2 answers. So just a short introduction on who you are and why this is so important for you in today's age. I will start alphabetically. Let me do that? Annabelle.
Thank you, thank you. Hi, Chlande. Great to see you and to see everyone here. Um, this is a I am Anabel Cruz from Uruguay. Originally from my organization is the Communication and Development Institute based in Uruguay, created almost 4 decades ago, 38 years ago. And also very active in regional and global networks, namely Rendir Cuentas. I'm very really proud to be contributing to the organization of this conversation, and also very active in global networks, like the Global Standard CSO Accountability and also Civicus. So this is a very timely conversation indeed. Trust is one of the pillars of democracy, is one of the everybody can mute the mix, please. Thank you. Trust is one of the most important, as I see it, pillars for democracy. It enables organizations and institutions to cooperate because it enables legitimacy, and it allows us to work with each other, to cooperate, and to develop our work. But mistrust and distrust is becoming an obstacle for all this. And I hope this conversation can shed us light in not only in describing the problem, but see how we can face this and counteract some negative forces. Thank you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Annabelle. Just reminding us that I love that trust is a pillar of democracy, and it allows us to either work together or not, and helps us to, most especially, to protect the legitimacy that we need as a sector to do what it is we need to do and represent our people. We'll come over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chalande. I'm going to introduce myself as a lifelong champion of civic action and civil society. I've had many different roles and I'm part of several networks, including Civicus, which is where I know Annabelle and several people I can see on the screen. So it's really great to be among friends. I'm currently in a more academic setting. I'm in Oxford and working with the Atlantic Institute. The reason I am in this conversation, other than the fact that it's Annabelle and Megan who've pulled me in, is because I like to question the idea that somehow we're failing at trust. I don't think we are. In fact, a lot of the challenges we're facing is the result of the success we've had, particularly the resourcing challenges. And as someone who's spent the last 30 odd years mobilizing people on the ground, being very, very familiar with how community organization works, I do want to be the voice that asks us not to, to question the questions, right? And not to just believe the rhetoric, because we are doing a lot more than we are credited for.
I like it. I already see your championship there, already challenging us and saying, let's change that narrative. We're not quite there yet. Championing for folks that have worked indeed for a long time to build trust. So that's very interesting perspectives you'll bring to us, Lisa. And over to you, Tanya.
Hi everyone, lovely to be with you all. My name's Tanya Wood. I'm the director of the Core Humanitarian Standard Alliance. So we're a network organisation, around 250 members across the globe. And what unites those members, Chilanda, it was really great to hear your story at the beginning, because the CHS is exactly that, trying to get a set of commitments, not to the donors, not to the partners, not to our flag waving, but really on the essence of what's important to the communities. What matters if I'm a recipient, or I need to receive, or I need the support of others? What would I expect? So that's the essence of the CHS, which pulls these organisations together. And then I'm here because super passionate, I think, having worked in the humanitarian sector all my career, you really do see the kind of the best and the worst of what can happen, where there is a lot of power differentiation. And so the idea that we have a set of standards that we can be held to account to is really needed when you do see the best and sometimes the worst of what can happen in some of these humanitarian operations. And then the other one, which I'm really pleased, is partly working in as many of my friends on the call do. We all work in these network organisations, and I think we're really pleased to be here now with these different partners and really this idea of collaboration and particularly needing to pull together at this really, really challenging time. So it's really great that we can have these different networks and civil society collaborations come together.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's already a powerful way in which you all have started just by introducing yourselves. And so I will, and it's very interesting, some already ideas that have been put on the table. And I want to probably ask those of us who are already participating, you're not here to just listen. Do tell us your own opinion as well on this topic of trust in a trustless world. What do you think? We've already started hearing challenges that perhaps we're not trusted enough, or perhaps we are trusted. What are you doing? Please share in the chat. What are you doing yourselves to build trust amongst your communities, not to the donors? We know what we have to do. That's a kind of. Today, I want to think about what are you doing to show trust amongst your peers and also to build trust from the communities that you serve. So please put them there on the chat for us. I'm sure Megan is watching that diligently. But coming back, to the panel, and this, I'm going to come back to you, Lisa, actually, because you did put that thought already in our head, because we have had that, and I know you've started talking about a little bit in your introduction, but there is a growing narrative that both societal and institutional trust is at an all-time low. How do you think this is just impacting civil society at all? Or for you, do you think that's not quite the question? What are your thoughts, Lisa? And then prepare yourself, Annabella. I also want to hear your thoughts on that.
I think, just to be very brief, but we are, of course, part of that, the overarching fall in trust in public institutions. I mean, that does affect us. That there's an entire kind of generational approach of questioning, which is not a bad thing, of kind of reading between the lines, not taking things at face value. That's all great. These were things we've been advocating for the last 50, 60 years, right? We've been asking that publics actually question more, not take things at face value. So again, it's a sign of success that a lot of the kind of activist or advocacy mindset that we've always represented is now being, experienced at a much larger scale. But having said that, we're not the institution that's kind of experiencing a complete breakdown in trust. It's actually government, businesses, and media, journalists. Almost 70% of publics, interviewed or surveyed as part of the Edelman Trust Barometer have said that they don't trust journalists anymore. And that, for me, that's a bigger shock than the civil society stats, where it's the first time in the last 25 years of their survey where civil society is not number one. So that, there's obviously room for improvement, but it's not like we're the ones who've broken the standard in terms of trust. And I think what we can learn from is where the trust currently operates, and that's very much at the local level. It's with local employers, it's with local institutions like religious or social institutions, it's with local civil society more than global. And that really points to the strategies or the approaches we need, which is all about connecting, organizing, and being much more direct in terms of the localization direction of travel as well, which I'm sure other speakers will also talk to in their interventions.
I like that. I like that. Thank you for actually putting out there that, while the narrative might be out there, actually there is very strong trust rooted in some of the local actors that are there. It brings to mind the confusion that the world had when Africa seemed to be celebrating the fall of USAID. And everyone was like, yes, let them go with their big cars. And it seemed like we're celebrating. And I don't think, when talking to colleagues, I said, I don't think we're celebrating that this help is going away. I think it's a message being
Que
sent.
el USAID no, ya no existía. No creo que no es verdad. No estamos celebrando esto, ¿no? Pero bueno, no quiero.
But it was a show of maybe some trust had been eroded in some actors in our ecosystem. But pivoting on to you, Annabelle, what do you think about this? And do you think we've had a role to play in how people think or perceive the sectors with regards to trust?
Absolutely. On the one hand, as we were saying before, mistrust, this misinformation is becoming an obstacle for our work, and it's harder and harder to counteract and to present our own narrative because of different factors and because there are so many forces. The impact on civil society, on the one hand, is high in terms of support, from financial support, funding, in terms of support from the public, in terms of support from the people. That impossibility to connect and reconnect with people, to tell our truth, because if we are going to rebuild trust, we have to rebuild truth. And that's very important in terms of learning to connect with our primary constituents, with the people we work for or we say we represent. So it's manifold and a lot of work to do for all of us here. We all have to put our grain of sand.
Absolutely. Thank you. I like that. In order for us to rebuild trust, we must rebuild truth. Allow me to steal that for the foreseeable future. Annabelle, I like that. Now, coming to you, Lisa, just in the context, a little bit of the other side of this same conversation. In the face of all of this and whatever is going on, and, as you can see, everything that's happening and the attacks on democracy, human rights, the rule of law, all of that. What do you think civil society can do to rebuild trust in this increasingly authoritarian world? Is there anything we can do?
So firstly, I'm going to just clarify that I don't have all the answers, and there's definitely not a correct answer to this. I'm going to rely quite a lot on the work that I've done in the past, including with, Save the Children and Civicus, also as part of the work that happened before the post-2015 agenda was written up. And I think the two things that really stand out for me in terms of where we could do more is making the connection with the communities we are part of and represent much stronger. When I started off in civil society, the designation of community organizer was a very celebrated one. I started off as somebody who was a community organizer myself. I think what I've seen in the last, 20 to 25 years is that is no longer a title or a role that is resourced in most networks. You no longer have community organizers unless you're in a political party where that's essential. And I think what we need to learn from where we've seen lots of new social movements or even radical or right-wing movements emerge is that you just cannot replace the door-to-door connection. If you don't have somebody who's actually going out, building community, building the kind of catalytic force behind an issue or or change, nothing you write or read and advocate for, no matter how strong you think the influence of social media is, nothing is going to replace that. And that comes back to the trust surveys, right? Why are local employers the most trusted? Employer newsletters or employee newsletters are more trusted than mainstream media today, and it's simply because the person
tiene más,
who's providing the message.
pues a veces
I would say, and it's kind of linked to that, is from a lot of the evidence that's been contributed to civil society and trust is the depoliticization of issues of equity. So there isn't a neutral way to lean into difficult issues. We do have to take a stand. We do have to, kind of be upfront about what mechanisms or what, frameworks we're supporting. And that again comes back to connecting with the human experience or the community experience. And that's a more tricky path to navigate. So how do we know when we're becoming irrelevant? So are we going to be so afraid to take a position that we actually become irrelevant to anybody who is affected by that issue, and then really lose trust and significance?
Mm. How do we know when we're becoming irrelevant? That's a good one. And that's connected very well to your message of, those who are trusted are people. We trust those that we know, who are bringing us any particular solution. That's something for us to really think about. And so Tanya, coming over to you. So, again, just building off of that question, and I'm just thinking, within this era of such growing inequality and, power seems very unchecked. Those that are in power, people keep asking really, who are the predators? Who can actually check some of this power that seems to be growing in a few hands? How do you think that civil society in itself can, within that context, hold itself to a higher standard? And then more importantly, ensure that it serves the community that it represents? Because the tendency when such things happen is for us to pivot and start to serve the master, so to speak. So within this realm where it's growing inequalities, you want to do something, but at the same time, there's these people with power and control. How do we stay true? How do we stay true to whatever, higher standards these are, and make sure that really we center those that we need to center, and not get swayed within the power flows that happen? What
Yeah,
do you think?
Shalanda. I think I go back to your great framing story at the beginning where you set the stage for us, which is really framing what we're being held to account on to the people that we're actually serving. Like we've said it, you just said it before, we've got all the systems and the processes and we abide by, for better or worse, the accountability to the donors. That's a lot of what we do in terms of serving those. But many of us working in civil society have been trying to shift that power to what's really important to the people and the communities. What do they want to hold us accountable to? And we're sort of in the middle of trying to balance those in civil society. Often we're trying to balance those two pressures, but without enough attention has not been on serving and the accountability to the communities. So this was, again, sort of the essence of why something like the core humanitarian standard was developed, on the basis of a unifying framework that could hold true accountability to communities. And we've tested it in lots of different ways and talked to lots of communities, and we just did a big review a couple of years ago. And it really is amazing that when you talk to communities in all different parts of the globe, you really can pull it down to kind of things that are at the core essence of what people want. They want to be treated with dignity. They want to be able they want to be able to be served by people they trust. And that often means people who know and understand and talk the language and understand what they're talking about, or another woman rather than a man. And they want transparency. This came through really clearly, they want transparency, it's basic accountability. This is what we're going to do, and we expect that's what you will do, not do something else, and they want the communication. Then we also have, which is the sort of the element around the sort of do no harm as well. Like they want to feel protected and they want to feel safe. And these are very core to any of us that we all resonate with. But it's being explicit about that, about what they can expect. And then ultimately when it comes to kind of the topic of conversation here around accountability, what are the consequences of not holding true to that? And civil society has a role to play in really making sure that it can measure up to what it says it does. And that sometimes happens great, but there's also examples where it doesn't. And we need to keep holding ourselves to that higher standard of accountability because it comes back to the essence of this conversation. Otherwise, we lose the trust. If we don't do what we say we do, we lose the trust of the communities.
I love that. Community-centered standards. Those that respond to those are more likely to be impactful to help rebuild that. But also, I like you throwing in the idea of consequences, because that's always the problem. Is that, okay, fine. So you have the standards you put out, this is my intention. But if somebody does not meet those standards, then what? And I think that's why many people then get away with some of the good intentions that are out there. So really spotlighting the idea of having consequences when people don't adhere. Now, I'll come back to you, Annabelle, and I'm just thinking we cannot ignore the global aid system crisis that we're currently on. In the middle of, and we're already beginning to see ripple effects and other, impacts of what this is, doing. Initially, it was about people losing jobs, and then now we're actually beginning to see and feel what is actually happening in communities and with some of our governments. So in this context, where then the resources, both resources and capacities of essentially of civil society is tighter than ever. I know we've been doing this work together for very, very many years on trying to promote this idea of dynamic accountability. Why do you think it's a mistake for us to skip or to pause or deprioritize accountability just now? Because people are saying, okay, maybe we just hold on, let's just take the money and do what we need to do. Why do you think it is a mistake for us to do that in pursuit of resources? Because that's what I'm beginning to see people saying, let me at least take the money and just do what I need to do. Forgetting that, oh my God, but what systems have we put in place? What are the values? What are the standards still? People even saying things like, the means justifies the ends. Why do you think it is a mistake for us to deprioritize the principles of accountability?
It's so good and so timely that you brought that point, Chilande. I am seeing organizations that are willing to forget, at least for the time being, some principles and just to survive. I am seeing organizations that are ready to change their names because it has been asked, because of it cannot be called the Citizen Forum, but it has to be called the Alliance, the Intersectoral Alliance for Security and Prosperity, things like that, imposed. So it's really frustrating, sometimes discouraging, because that's going back to what we have, many of us, and you and I, Chilande, with that dynamic accountability. We have to de-link accountability from compliance, and we have to de-link accountability from money. And it's like we are going back into the cruelty of market with these practices. So going back and what Tanya was
Lo que
saying
Tanya
about,
dijo
it's really the work of the core
es que
humanitarian
es
standard
el
is a
trabajo.
beautiful example on that intention and practice of going back to the communities, of listening to the communities, on respecting and bringing them into the decision-making power, into the listening, the real needs, so we respond, working together, respecting, mutual accountability. So it's a mistake because we will be far and farther from our mission and our work, and that will be another thing and not civil society. Let me say that civil society is not homogeneous, and there are parts of uncivil civil society that have helped to this situation, that are responsible for violence and harassment. But no, it's the organizations we are trying to work with and what we are trying to be. We should not go apart from our principles and mutual accountability. Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling that out, Annabelle, because I've been seeing how quickly people have pivoted back. And I say, oh my God, what were we doing anyway? All these years, all these decades, was it for naught? Were we just conforming or seeming to make progress within parameters that maybe it was never in our control, that perhaps we only made progress because we were allowed to? Because for people to go back into shifting the way I've seen websites changing, terminologies, people just, oh, yes. So thank you for calling that out. This is the forum for us to have those hard questions. We are civil society, so it's time we question ourselves. This forum in itself is a form of peer accountability mechanism for us to actually hold each other accountable for some of these things that we're doing and justify or not, or say, look, I did wrong there or not. And, Tanya, do you want to weigh in there as well on that question?
Yeah, I think I just keep wanting to bring back this. I think it builds on that sort of what you were just saying about the sort of short-term reactionary and how we pivot at this moment. Because with your question around sort of what's at stake right now around accountability, one of the lessons that we're hearing and learning on is some of the work that's being done in the sector on kind of safeguarding, preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, which we see as kind of one of the worst forms of accountability failures has been. But if we think back end of 2019, the sector was also rocked by the kind of safeguarding scandals, and that also destroyed the trust in the sector then, rightfully so. So there was a lot of work done since then. And it's happened in the past, it goes in waves, we know it happens. And there's been a lot of work and attention gone on to safeguarding and preventing sexual exploitation in the sector. But I think also memories are small, and what we're really seeing now and hearing is there's a real threat to that kind of being eroded. We know it was building on Lisa's point before. The community engagement people are being cut. They know what's going on in the communities. The safeguarding people are being cut. The people who manage the complaint lines are being cut. Like, these are the things that we feel is not essential anymore. But as soon as you start to cut that, you're really starting to, you open up that power vacuum so that more abuse can take place if people aren't watching and being watchdogs around what's happening. And then we're just going to go back into this. The trust will get even further eroded, and we're in a kind of catch-22. So I think there's this, and again, it goes back to what Annabelle just said. We've got to kind of not just see accountability as this sort of, what we hold ourselves to account from and the tick boxes. But accountability really does mean that trust with communities, which means lives are kind of destroyed if the trust is broken, security becomes an issue. So we've really got to try and really not let some of these efforts where we've tried to build trust in the system because we got rocked by a scandal, have made progress, and now through this latest scandal, which is, I think, really sort of systemic and is going to be a changing point, but that we continue to really hold those lessons that we've learned from civil society and keep moving forward.
Amazing. Thank you. Very pertinent points there. But I want to pivot back to you, Lisa. I think we've given you a little bit of time to drink some water. Hopefully you did. I want to come to you to get us started. So just building off of that, staying with that thread of what we can do. And just beginning to think about the other players in our ecosystem. What do you think civil society organizations need from funders, from perhaps their constituents, some of their partners, whether it's in programming, to strengthen their independence and resilience, within our ecosystem, especially in the majority world, because that's what it's calling down for. It's questioning our independence and resilience, our ability to bounce back from this very troubling time. What would you, a few ideas about what they could get from others? And maybe I'll take some of your thoughts to Annabelle and Tanya on the same question. What do you think we need from all our key stakeholders?
So there's so many thoughts exploding in my mind as people speak. So I'm going to try and focus on just one or two that will probably make sense. But also, I'm going to be a bit provocative. I just want to say that, civil society is so diverse and so different. It's impossible to make a statement that actually applies to everybody. But having said that, I feel like the resourcing crisis and the trust challenges are not the same. And I think we need to really recognize that we are not being under-resourced because people don't trust us. In fact, it's the other way around, that the resourcing is being cut because we are such a force of trust, of collective action, and we're being seen as a challenge to the stakeholders who hold power. So in no way do I see the current kind of challenges we have as a representation that we're being less legitimate or less powerful. In fact, I think the exponential growth of civic action in the last, 10 years, for instance, has been just incredible in terms of just how many groups of people beyond the traditional, not-for-profit kind of sector are engaging, have engaged. Everybody with a phone is an activist now. So I think we need to just recognize that the scale of work has shifted completely. The amount of energy that's invested in trying to think of how society should change is not just coming from us, it's coming from many other actors. So the greatest opportunity right now is to think of new partners and new collaborators, right? I think we've relied for far too long on traditional donors. We already knew the system was broken. I mean, 10 years ago, you had that letter which went around to the INGOs. We've been resourced in a way that doesn't allow us to do long-term thinking. It doesn't allow us to actually meaningfully collaborate with others. There's this pressure to keep growing, take large amounts of money, and then spend it as quickly as possible. So I think what this change implies is the end of an era of intermediaries. I think the intermediary structure and the mechanisms will die out now, but it does mean that it'll open us up just out of sheer need to other opportunities for direct resource mobilization in our own countries through our other allies. I have great respect actually for Tanya and Megan, because anybody who's in the business of creating
and we engage ourselves in, but also into the kind of relationship that we have, whether it's long-term, whether we are addressing long-term strategic needs, or we're just, window dressing, as we say here, just doing what is on the top and not really going deep. So your thoughts, Annabelle, on this same question. What do you think we need? What kind of support do we need to build our independence, our resilience as a sector?
Well, let me take a very concrete example and about what we need from funders, from donors. One of the things we need is that funders, donors, intermediaries, they read the OECD Development Assistance Committee recommendation on enabling civil society in international cooperation and humanitarian assistance. Is that a long line? Yes, but it's
That
the
is
right
it.
way.
Well
Yeah,
done.
it is. Well done. Yeah. Now, well, I mean, that they read and implement the recommendation, because many of the things we are saying here, it's there. The recommendation was approved 5 years ago. It's going to become 5 years now, the approval in July. And besides saying happy birthday to the recommendation, we have to demand and we expect, we can also help that. The third pillar of the recommendation is about incentivizing transparency, accountability of civil society, and effectiveness of civil society. It has also 7, 8 activities of sub-recommendations, and it's about recognizing self-regulation effort. It's about promoting equitable partnerships between providers and civil society. So it's there, and it has been approved unanimously by the DAC members. So it's an instrument, a tool that we have and we can advocate for. And many of the needs that we have are expressed there. Thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, because I'm seeing many people still trying to come up with new thoughts, ideas, standards, tools, and you know your point.
No, and the recommendation is saying regarding of the core humanitarian standard of the global standard, many tools are ready, of course, have to be adapted, but it's the implementation and compliance of those already approved tools that seems necessary.
I like it. Thank you for spotlighting that. Tanya, what do you think from your neck of the woods?
Maybe just because I think agreeing with what Lisa and Annabelle have said, but two thoughts I think I'd like to reference is I think what I'm really cautious around right now is we take a sort of scarcity mindset. Like we know resources have been absolutely gutted and it's a different world. But if we go into this, let's do less with less, we're just going to shoot ourselves in the foot. It's that idea that, you know, Annabelle, you were drawing attention to earlier about adapting and trying to change our values and trying to adapt to this new world order. We've got to kind of stay really true and hold. But that's going to take us and really rethink about this idea of innovation and collaboration, because what we've been thinking about a lot, and we being like the network of the alliances, it was a collective endeavor to sort of put our logos aside, try and really focus on what the needs of communities are. But the system hasn't been set up like that. The system is set up that it pits organizations in competition for scarce resources. And I think it's fascinating to see right now. I think there's some amazing discussions going on. There's some really light bulb moments, and there's a lot of the kind of frustration, of course, but we need to keep the frustration high, but to really rethink and think about how things can finally be done in a different way. But we're kind of dismantling on the go, and we need to dismantle and we need to kind of think about things creatively. And most of us who work in this sector usually are trying to do things really innovatively with scarce resources anyway. But we have to kind of keep holding the values high and thinking about what would make the most sense. And I think it's going to be, I sort of see it as a wave right now. I think we sort of went into that shock piece. Yeah. And there was a sort of set, you know, there was naturally kind of trying to plug the holes in the different boats to try and see. Now everyone's the storm's still raging, and I think people are still trying to navigate where to kind of anchor to and where they can anchor. And I really want to feel optimistic and positive that in the next there's going to be a sort of a wave where the storm does start to calm and we can start to see those patterns. And we do try and do some innovative collaboration, but it will mean, and I don't think the sector's very good at this, is putting the logos aside and really trying to think of what makes the system wide. But there is some amazing thinkers out there. There's some great ones on this call that I can see are there to keep thinking about this. But it's why conversations with the networks are so important.
Yeah. I mean, if there was ever a time for us to dust off and understand what the word innovation means, we used to always say it and even put it in our values. But I think if there was ever a time for us to demonstrate what that looks like, I think it is now. And really, really, again, we've been proven that we really can't do anything on our own. Like collaboration is no longer just a nice to do thing. We really, it becomes almost our lifeline right now. Now, the problem is I'm enjoying myself just only by myself. I feel like I'm just by myself and enjoying talking to these ladies here. I don't know if that was by design or not, but I am not complaining. That is just ladies here. These are rare occasions. And maybe move over to you, Megan. Are there any questions coming? But I also know you did collect some questions prior to this session. So chime in, please.
Totally. Well, Chilende, there are a number of fascinating comments and questions popping in through the chat and in our form. Let me just give you a flavor of a couple and you see how you want to take those forward. So kind of riffing off this last discussion we were having, and I think Tanya, your kind of reflections as well, and like putting the logos aside, Kate is wondering about what are the ways we can better connect the different efforts working on trust and accountability within civil society across the sector. You know, there's a sense of duplication and competition. And they're curious what an ecosystem approach would look like. So I know Chilende and Annabelle will also talk about our ecosystem approach with the global standard. And then Alex, kind of wanted to hear more about the vertical versus horizontal accountability efforts. And, he was talking about horizontal accountability efforts being those where we're working on accountability across the sector or accountability of other actors, whereas that vertical is more that internal look, like what are we as organizations, institutions, collectives actually doing about our own accountability? And this is a topic near and dear to Accountable Now's heart, since we focus a lot on how we do good better, starting with our own practices. And Alex's sense is that we haven't, gone far enough in some of these inquiries internally yet. And then in terms of I'll just throw one more in the mix and then let you see how you'd like to take us forward. Or maybe I will. Let's see. Yes, here. We wondered about similarly a question, how do we become more adept at dynamic accountability across sectors versus within particular sectors? And this might be kind of coming back to some of our esteemed panelists' comments on some of these universal values that might sit at the base of accountability, and where do we need that sectoral focus and where might we want to look beyond? See what you make of those?
Just a simple task.
Yeah, just small ones.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's some of these questions that are, a natural fit for some of you on here, although you can all speak to it, to be honest. And we'll tackle them. I mean, these are three potentially heavy conversations, but I think we do have time. And let's see, maybe we can start off. I'm not going to point at anybody, although I kind of know. I'm looking at you through my screen, but so thankfully you can't tell exactly who I'm looking at, but hopefully they can feel the vibe. So let's just start off with, what are the opportunities for an ecosystem approach to this idea? I totally agree. There's a lot of efforts that have been there from the past, that maybe some of the problems that people maybe don't know, because our sector is also very transient, right? People come, they go, and maybe they go with the institutional memory. What are the opportunities in your views on how we can connect all the efforts that are out there on trust and accountability? Let me just start with that first question and see, if there's anything that comes to mind for any of you. And from the audience too, if you know any other efforts, please feel free to type them in.
I'm happy to take a stab, and it kind of actually connects the answer that an offering. I'd suggest links to that other point about the lateral accountability as well. So I'm maybe trying to leave a two in one. And I'm going to give a very sort of practical example from the CHS, if that's okay. Like the CHS came about as it's been this long sort of process of how do we hold organisations accountable, from the idea of a mega ombudsman through to trying to have a very self-regulating standard that organisations could hold themselves accountable to. And that's what the CHS has been. And now we've got a sort of a critical mass of organisations, a lot of national NGOs now, we're half national NGOs, who are holding and verifying how they meet this standard. And that's fantastic, great. But it doesn't get us to what the core issue was at the very beginning, which was that disconnection between accountability of what the communities see and then what organisations are doing. So the answer, or what I would offer to that suggestion, is at the theoretical level, we can have lots of these conversations, and that's really important. But what we've got to do is go down to kind of where the rubber hits the road, which is working at the community level. So we've been really interested, and we'd love to partner with others on this, which is how do you take a response area or an area where you've got lots of actors working, and you really look at what is happening around meeting whatever accountability standards. We know that all of our accountability standards map against each other, so basically they're looking at the same fundamental things. And we really try and understand what it means at that country level. Like theoretically, we can do the mapping and we can do the collaboration. But if we're really serious about what it means to hold organizations to account, we need to be doing that with the community's views and then seeing what happens on the ground. We'd started a process like this, which I think would be really, again, is super interesting, because it wasn't about the challenge always is the sort of top down. We see so many initiatives like this where people come in and review an operation, but this was trying to use peers, which I know is what, again, Accountable Now try and do, the sort of peer accountability piece. So we really start a sort of strong peer accountability dialogue, but at the country level of what's actually happening there than the sort of theoretical. So then we can get to the lateral approach, but also I think it would be a great way of also looking at some of these frameworks and really trying to understand what they mean at the kind of grassroots level. But it does require that you have a group of organizations who would be willing to collaborate. And so that's why the network approach comes in, where we've made commitments already to some of these frameworks to see how they're being operationalized. As a thought to throw out some innovative ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Really packed with a lot in there. And so I want to build up on them, but it's not my time. Let me wait for the rest. Any other thoughts want to chime in there? We can go to another question.
Just saying that what I call trust building initiatives, the core humanitarian standard is, as I said, a beautiful example, and the global standard for CSO accountability brought a lot of lessons learned and the experience of the core humanitarian standard. And what we have tried to do in almost 1 decade of work is setting up, bringing to landing those standards in useful tools, even for communities, even for individuals. So organizations can self-assess themselves in where we are, but in simple ways. So accountability and all this ecosystem becomes a reality. So I'm going to put it in the chat, our tool called Rendir app, which is a very simple assessment tool in 4 languages already, which is an example on how we are trying in organizations and trying to build this from the ground and helping organizations to become accountable by analyzing how accountable I am and how long I have to still walk.
Yeah. Thank you. And actually, I like also, I know she was not technically on the panel, but Megan, I really must put you on the spot now to speak a little bit, especially, and I think it will tie in that. It will also tie in the question around, the efforts around vertical versus horizontal accountability, because I know you do active work in trying to engage that and answering my dear friend's question there, or comment on what happens and what can we do to ensure that we reduce these intentions from being just performative and actually yield some results. So a little bit heavy, but giving you your moments in the spotlight.
Oh, Chalande, you're too kind. Let's see. This is, Annabelle just introduced the CSO, the global standard for CSO accountability. That is the standard that underpins our work at Accountable Now. We are a membership-based platform that works with organizations who want to sign up to ask get asked harder questions about their work, the extent to which their values and practices are adding up and matching one another, the extent to which they're living out their commitments and words. So this is a huge focus of our work and has been for almost 20 years now. We're lucky to have a few members of our independent review panel with us. I see Tahir is here, Marlene and Brendan. Thank you all for joining. These are a group of experts who volunteer their time basically to help organizations check in on their practices and actions, and to offer advice and insights on how to improve. We certainly take an approach that is focused on learning. For us, accountability isn't a one moment in time, one report, one assessment. It's about that continual showing up again and again to check in on your gaps, your blind spots, and what's working, to listen to your communities and stakeholders, and center them in your work in real ways, and helping you assess the evidence about whether or not you're doing that. And so, for us, there are a lot of calls out there for different frameworks for accountability. I mean, you've talked about not letting go of serving the masters a few times now, Chalande, but what we, I think, really appreciate about our approach and the approach in the global standard for CSO accountability is it's not donor mandated. It's not government mandated. Organizations are showing up because they want to and know they need to. And so that brings a real kind of magic to the equation. And we share that with our global standard partners, including our co-host for the event today, Rendir Cuentas and Annabelle. But we have partners all over the world who are taking this similar approach. It's really easy to have a disconnect in language and action. And I think we try to thread the needle between really, exposing and preventing harm and addressing it with urgency. And also recognizing that organizations need space to grow, learn, and fail, and that we're not always going to get it right. We're working on the hardest things in the hardest places with nowhere near the resources and capacity that are required for these issues. So it's no surprise that issues come up. So that's kind of a needle we try to thread with this idea of that vertical accountability and internal look. I could wax poetic forever, so let me stop there, Chalande.
Thank you. No, thank you. That gives us the whole idea of this is to actually give people some practical examples on efforts being made, and so that we can actually ask them more, do a deeper dive on them, and see how we can either support or challenge each other on what's going on. So thank you for allowing me to throw you under the bus, so to speak. Now, coming back to the panel then, but I also see, then I'm gonna try just so that we get a little bit of a different voice on the call. Bonnie, do you have the courage to to speak a little bit about what you just put out there, because it's so critical to this conversation, the idea about peer accountability being so important to keeping this transparency and momentum going. Do you want to say a little bit?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure, I can say a few things. Hi to friends Annabelle and Lisa. And as many of you know, a number of years ago, some of us started a project called Civil Society and Testing Change, with the idea that to make these kinds of changes, you needed peer organizations to help you through it. And it was never designed to last forever. We ran it for about a decade. But one of the things that was under-resourced like everything else, but one of the things that we learned is that having that working together with peers, and I know Kate's doing some of this with the Pledge for Change now, working together with peers is so critical, because there's so many times that you're going to slip for one reason or another, because you've got must-dos as opposed to like-to-dos, which is what change is often considered to be, or where you have board or other stakeholders who are wondering, is this really what we need to do? And working with other organizations who can both give you additional ideas, but also the momentum and the courage in some ways to keep going just makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for coming out. You see, when you speak it, it's much, it lands deeper than when you just type it in there. So feel free, and if anybody else wants to speak rather than type it, just put up your hand and we'll give you a chance. Now there's a question we still haven't tackled that was put out there, and I think that is potentially also quite heavy, and really welcoming thoughts and ideas. What have you seen in your corners of the world? This idea of how do we enforce dynamic accountability across sectors? It's much easier to speak to people who look and feel like you, which is what tends to happen. So that's why we end up in our little cocoons that are thematic, either the area we work in or the geographical area that we work in or the subject matter. But what do we know? What do we see? What ideas do we have about how we can go across sectors and try to build out on these principles there? And again, I should leave it just open to anybody on the panel to speak, but also feel free if you're in the audience and you have some thoughts and ideas to put up your hand.
Let me jump in. Now, I actually got excited when Bonnie spoke and was going to chime in on the optimistic part, but I'll try and respond to this as well. I do think that the big shift now is that we're going to have to do a lot more friend raising than fundraising. And I just love the matchmaking, that template that Accountability Lab has put out. We shouldn't have had to wait for a funding crisis to do that. I mean, not Accountability Lab, but the rest of us. Because again, I think it's the way that the resourcing model has been designed, where we're constantly putting ourselves forward. We all want to be leaders. None of us want to be followers, and none of us want to actually, kind of step back and be part of something that's not designed to get us more visibility and access, right? I think that's fundamentally changed in my own experience, and I'm thrilled to see that at least one Atlantic Fellow, who's also a member of my board, is on this call. My board the Atlantic Institute board has taken a decision that we will not compete for resources in this environment, and we're basically going to shift completely into a cost sharing or an income generation approach. And I think we are able to do that because we have a donor who's given us long-term resources. And what's stunning to me now, having worked in so many other roles in the last, 27 years, is that donors front load a lot of money, but then they have such strict timelines about how you need to spend it. And that's kind of part of the game we play as well as international NGOs, where we constantly measure our success in terms of how much we can spend each year. I really think this is the moment where we need to talk to donors about giving us smaller sums of money, but for longer amounts of time, because that enables you to come with your own, asset or capital to the table and then work much more with others. And then when I talk about others, I'm not just talking about civil society. I think, when way back in 2013, when the high-level panel on the post-2015 agenda released its report, there was a huge backlash against the report when the whole the statement was put out that the future of development is in the private sector, and we were just not ready to accept it. But that's the reality today, right? And we haven't spent enough time figuring out how to make friends in business who are not necessarily businesses that are completely against or undermining the values that we work for, what we do, without finding ways to enter the market kind of based income generation, spaces. It's going to be very difficult. I know, at least from the global south, to survive. And everybody I've seen, for instance, from South Asia, who are the next gen kind of civil society leaders, are not registering themselves as not profits. That's very true of Kenya as well. I mean, East Africa, I'm sure in other spaces as well. They're registered as not for profit businesses or enterprises, and that's the future. So I think we do have to start kind of straddling these different worlds, finding out how we can exist in ways that are not necessarily purist, but without losing, the values and the foundations of what we exist for.
Mm. Mm. I like that, just spotlighting not only innovation, but another consequence sometimes of trust being, shaken, right? You don't trust in somebody being around, and you could either die or you could choose to say, you know what, it's time. Let's think about something different. And this is, just you spotlighting that for us. But anybody else want to speak on this whole idea of across sectors?
Just
Yeah.
mentioning the importance of cooperation within our sector and across sectors. And some ideas that are being even tested because of merging, participatory funding, all that has to be based on trust and recognition of the work of the others. That's really one of the bases for trust. That if we owe if other organizations have done certain work and we want to use it, it's free for use, but we have to recognize their work. That's crucial in terms of continue and build on trust. And I sometimes I see examples on websites and other tools developed, for instance, based on the global standard or based on probably on the core humanitarian standard, that they do not say explicitly that the work is based on previous work of other organizations. I think that's one of the crucial, first steps, departing from that step to continue building on trust.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chilan.
Yeah, Annabelle, and that's an interesting thing, I think, and it comes from some, not wholly, but it does come from the fact that we've been operating in silos, but also we've been operating with a mindset of competition. So that if I take somebody else's work, you want to keep attributing it to yourself and don't do enough to actually let people know, I'm building off of so-and-so's energies and efforts, and thank you for that, right? So, and we don't do enough of that, which is why it's so critical for us to also continue to think about peer accountability processes and platforms and spaces of that nature. Now, time is going really fast. Oh my goodness. I thought I had a lot more time than this. Megan, can we please have some thoughts and ideas from, I know you have a fancy tool for us that we can use. Can I give you a moment?
Thanks, Chilande. Absolutely. I know we could continue this conversation for a while, so it's hard to take a break. But we did want to hear more from the folks who are with us today and get some inspiration, not only for today to kind of sum us up, but also for the road ahead. So my colleague Bauhan is going to share her screen. We have a quick mentee poll. If you can use the QR code, connect on your phone. We want to hear just quickly, what's one word or concept that's, been resonating with you. I think you actually get the opportunity to list three. So it doesn't even just have to be one word. So as they start coming in, we'll start to see those responses showing up. And feel free to jump on in and, offer any reflections either in the chat or over mic as you're typing your ideas in. Love the growing word cloud. The link is also in the chat if the QR code doesn't work for you for some reason. Oh, these are great.
I love colors. Images.
Wow, I like this idea of like collaboration, trust, peer. We're seeing that this has got to be bigger than any of us as individuals or any of us as our institutions, organizations, collectives. Friend raising, I love this. Whoever entered friend raising, do you want to share a quick idea? Like what are you thinking here?
I think Lisa brought it up.
Lisa, I love friend raising.
This is Lauren. Yes, Lisa did bring it up, and that just really stuck in my head. I think it's such a powerful reminder of where we are in this quote unquote post-aid world and how important it is for us to be thinking creatively about how to bring more people into this conversation and what development looks like moving forward. So thank you all so much for such an interesting and inspired conversation on the topic.
Thanks, Lauren. Nice to see you too.
Likewise.
I'm
Yeah,
enjoying the
it's
movement.
oh, Chilande, you go.
No, nothing. It was nothing useful. I was just enjoying the movements.
It is quite soothing to watch them populate and repopulate, isn't it? One thing that and I think we, experience this tension quite a bit at Accountable Now, and I'm sure Annabelle Rendir Cuentas and Tanya at CHS, you all experience this too. There's this sort of the solidarity angle and learning angle, and then there's the standards part of it all.
Mm.
It's interesting to see these words, around the kind of rigor and standard and, as our friend in the chat was talking about the sort of performative, who was Maxine, the performative words and dance we sometimes do versus the ability to actually check in on what's happening. And that's just a tension that I think we need to hold, while wanting space for failure, while noting the importance of collaboration and friend raising in times like these. It's also there does need to be some kind of red lines or standards somewhere as well to support and guide us. I don't know, Tanya or Annabelle or Chilande, Lisa, if you all have reflections on that front.
I was just really, yeah, I'd love to jump in, Megan, on that because it resonates. I think it goes back to what a lot of us have touched on here. I think it depends on what we're being held to account. Like, yeah, I don't think any of us would, when it comes to like the do no harm and the dignity and the safety, they're all things that we can rally around. They're all things that we want to be held accountable to, and we'd expect our peers to be held accountable. And that gets into all organizations could be held to those. It's really about that protecting the people and making sure those, and I think that's where I know we do, and I'm sure you do, as you said, sort of have to balance this tension because we're so used to accountability used around donors and compliance and that side. And yeah, I think we've got a huge, and I think there is a wave there, but it's how we articulate and try and say, we're not going to lower the standards on this. This is critical. And I don't think anyone would want to lower standards around protecting their daughters in and that's what we've got to make important. But it's being held to account on the right things and the things that, again, going back to the opening words, like what is the key things that we're being held to account on, and so trying to manage that tension. And I think there's still a lot of work for us to do on trying to articulate why it's so important, because we're trying to dismantle a system that's being built that puts priority on other things.
Thanks, Tanya. Lisa, come on in.
So I think, a lot of what we perceive as global standards, I think that's going to change fundamentally. Traditional donors have, kind of been Western countries, I guess, and foundations. With the entry of, donors from other spaces, other sectors, there's going to be a lot of upheaval. So I think there's a bit of a task in terms of holding on to what's the core values and what's universal, and letting go of what's, very Western donor driven, for the lack of any other word. With the entry of lots of other donors from Asia, from Latin America, from, all parts of the world, I think for each one of us, we're going to have to make certain calls and decisions based on our context, and not knowing the local context, I think, is not going to be viable anymore. If you don't know who your people in government are, who your local businesses are, we were allowed to exist in a kind of a bubble where, as long as we were kind of clued into the global donor, we were fine. But the donor was getting their money from somewhere else, right? Either through taxes or through consumers, or something else, through profits. And we're going to be closer to the source now, so that's an opportunity actually to learn new skills, to engage more directly with where the resourcing comes from.
I love that, Lisa. And I think we're all hopeful that that is true, that if you don't actually know the context, that it's not going to work anymore. That's a beautiful hope, I think, as well. While you have a hot mic, can I ask you to say, I see the word intergenerational has come up, and it's also a word that I've been thinking a lot about. And anything you want to kind of offer, I know you shared, but we didn't get to really sink our teeth into that idea.
Well, it's again, I think just at a personal level, the ability to sit in a space which has been an academic space for, kind of thousands of years, I guess, and to see how academic organizations think of themselves in a minimum of 100-year time scale. It's absolutely ridiculous that civil society has to constantly reinvent itself every 3 years. I think the first thing we need to do is go back to our governance structures and our, donors and whoever else we are with, that determines us, and of course our communities as well, and think of long-term existence. I think we've all just been caught in this kind of short-term thinking framework, which we now have the opportunity to challenge because it doesn't exist. I mean, it's falling apart. And that's what I think we should really be gaining from other sectors where obviously the resources exist and the ability to think long-term exists and to think about what, how they will engage. And what's happening is I think these kind of short-term crisis is preventing us from really doing the best work we can do on long-term challenges related to technology or climate or other issues, right? And we just need to grab our mind space and our worth, our self-worth back really, and make a
Tenemos
really tough
que
case for
pensar
that.
y
Really
luchar por eso.
appreciated those points, and honestly, as an
Gracias, sí, sí.
ED, I can't imagine thinking in decades instead of months
Es
and
verdad,
years.
es verdad
So
que
just the idea that
ahora mismo
academic
no puedo
institutions have had
pensar,
that.
¿no?
One
No
of our
puedo pensar
members, founding members as well,
a
Ryder, used
tanto
to
largo
write,
plazo,
and
pensar
they've
en
been
las
around for
próximas
over a
décadas en
century.
vez de los
And when
próximos
they talk
meses o
about their work
semanas.
and the
Pero es
movement
verdad,
of
como dijiste, que a nivel
intergenerational feminist
académico han
movements,
estado
they
aquí y
certainly
nunca han
reflect on
tenido
that
que
same sense of
recambiar o
scale.
reinventarse.
And wow, that would be, I think, incredible
Y
if more
bueno,
of us
sería
could plan even on a
increíble que
slightly longer
podamos
timeline.
planear nosotros también
Before
a
we
largo
move
plazo.
there's one final participatory activity we wanted
Hay
to
una última actividad
invite you all to
a las que queríamos pues, invitarles a
I'm gonna
participar.
participate in. I've already used that word too much, but you
Perdón,
know
ya
what I'm
he
saying.
utilizado esa palabra
Tanya,
muchas
did you want
veces,
to
pero bueno,
reflect on
ya me
word cloud
entienden,
here at
¿verdad?
all? Anything you're taking away?
So much.
Antes de pasar a esto, ¿hay
I think most of
alguna
it has been said. And just I
algo
guess in the
que,
interest of
pues
time,
un
I
resumen de
will
lo que
hold
ven,
my thoughts a little
lo que
bit,
ves
but
ahora en la
I
pantalla,
think
Chilanda?
just put
Sí,
huge
sí, muchas
emphasis
ideas, pero
on
pongo el
the
énfasis
idea of
en la idea de
collaborative advantage, the idea of collaborating,
de
connection. I like the
colaboración,
thread,
conexión,
collaboration, collective, connection,
cooperación,
and this whole
conexión,
and with that comes a
y
great
con
emphasis on
esto
lateral accountability.
veo
And I
mucho
think that
énfasis
part
en
we
la
need to
rendición
do
de
a lot more around. So I
cuentas
even like this, like
dinámicas
somebody put in there
sobre la que
the thoughts
tenemos que
around
trabajar,
community
la
organizer,
rendición de
of
cuentas
maybe
lateral,
some of the structures that we need to put in place.
y alguien lo ha
And just
puesto ahí,
plus
como
one,
veo, tenemos que pensar en las estructuras que tenemos que hay que poner,
not Lisa, I think Tanya
que hay que
Pastor talked
crear,
about being accountable to the
y
right things. I think there's a lot
y
to
también
unpack,
rendir cuentas
to
sobre las
unpack in there,
cosas
and the
pues
idea that
correctas, si
really
quieren.
proximity
Hay
becomes
mucho
a
que decir sobre
non-negotiable
esto
moving forward.
y
So
tenemos que empezar en las
I
cosas
know I
que
said I wasn't going to say
no
much, but
negociables, si quieren,
I love that
nuestros
you
valores
took
no
us up on it, though.
negociables.
Thanks, Shalande. Bauhan, do you want to move us to the next question?
Muchas
And
gracias, Chelande.
this
Vale,
is,
pasamos
we're
a la
inviting each of us as
próxima
people to think about
pregunta,
something we can do.
que es una cosa
From our perspective, it's easy to
que
set these
van a
ambitious
hacer
dreams of rethinking and reimagining our sector, and we need to
para
keep
incrementar la
thinking about
confianza
that and planning for a new
en su
future.
comunidad. Así
And
planeando
change starts with us
para el
as people.
futuro.
So go ahead and fill in any ideas.
Entonces,
And
por
should you
favor,
feel
pongan
called,
sus
come on
ideas
in and just tell us what you're
ahí.
thinking.
amazing. And with that, I will negotiate with the group because I see some people are starting to drop off. I promise we
Perfecto,
shall
ya
not
veo
go
que hay
over by more
muchas
than 5
personas
minutes,
que
if
ya
at
se
all.
están
But allow us
dejando
just
la
to
llamada.
harvest all of these and then make some
Prometo que no
final
vamos a
remarks.
estar aquí mucho más tiempo, solo por favor unos minutos para que todo el mundo pueda poner sus
Long-term
respuestas
trust-based funding,
y
love it.
concluirlo.
Ask them. I don't know who shared that, but perfect. Would love to hear you if you want to say more.
Simple things,
Preguntarles, no sé quién dijo esto, pero sí, estoy de acuerdo. Preguntar a la comunidad, sí, es muy lógico, ¿verdad? respeto.
I'll say that I did closing the loop. I think one of the things that is so hard
Una de las
when
cosas
you're
que creo que es
working
más
and you have a
difícil
lot of
hacer cuando estás
responsibilities that
trabajando,
people
tienes
think
muchas
about you, is
responsabilidades
to
y
miss
es
we did
muy
something and
fácil
then let's remind ourselves, okay,
pues
this is what happened, and
olvidarnos de lo que
here's
ya
the thing
hemos
I said I
hecho,
was going to get to you. And I think we
o
all tried our
decir,
best, but
o
it's certainly
devolver a lo que
something that we
habíamos
want to continue to
prometido.
work
A
on.
veces es
And I
algo
know
sobre el
that
que yo
follow
quiero
through
trabajar,
really builds trust and
porque ya sé que
invites sort
cuando
of,
pongo una
yeah.
expectativa o prometo algo,
Lisa,
esto,
come on in.
y vuelvo a
I wanted to
esto,
jump in with a
pues
story on
esto
this question, which I'm
crea
just familiar
confianza.
with because AGNA, the network of national associations, was part of the survey that was done during COVID on increasing trust in civil society and their sustainability. And one of the number one kind of factors for increased trust was public facing activities. So just being on the radio, having somebody from government or business appreciate your efforts. So the more you were in the public eye or narrative, the more the trust would increase. And I think that's again something we kind of overlook because we're linked to our specific community or the donor community or our other stakeholders. But being out there and in the larger space and in the public eye is important to accountability and trust. Well,
Thanks, Lisa. Absolutely. And we'd heard about transparency. Tanya even reflected on that and her, like, what are the basics that people want? And it's transparency, and it's that kind of ability to understand and really be clear about what you're doing and where it's all coming from. And yeah, I appreciate that. Annabelle, are you?
Well, yeah, I think it has been an unbelievable, great discussion about key challenges, and many important things have been said. I love that friend rising compliment that is because I mean that's what collaboration is, to raise and to work with allies and partners. That's very important. And complementing what you said about listening more on the words that here, to listen to community, ask them, but also closing the loop. That's very important, to go back to the communities with what we have done with their opinions. Have you used them? What are the decisions that we have made? Have we used even to go back and tell them what you said was useless, but we owe them and we owe communities. And with communities, I mean also internally within the organizations and the different smaller ecosystems we work with. But we owe that, closing the feedback. So we start another feedback loop. That's crucial in building trust and with communities and public trust as well. Great discussion, huh? Really.
Absolutely. I think we got a little shyer towards the end here. So I think, Chalande, any final remarks before Annabelle closes us out?
No, just to thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. You have demonstrated quite a lot of just openness and vulnerability and the transparency that we're looking forward to. And it has taken us to this depth of conversation. Thank you for all those who brought, their voices and their questions and their reflections into the space. One thing is very clear, I think, from everything that has been discussed, that the thoughts about erosion of trust, it's complex.